Lockdown extended. What happens when your landlord disconnects your water and electricity? Evictions during lockdown remain illegal. The moratorium on evictions has been gazetted in the regulations to the Disaster Management Act, issued on 16 April 2020. The regulations clearly state that evictions are prohibited, be it in formal housing, on farms, or in formal housing. Despite this clear law against any form of displacement, tenants have raised tenant rights violations. The landlords are disconnecting their electricity and water connection. This episode brings you advice on the steps you can take to address this matter. I'm your host, Zacharia Mashele. With me for this important discussion, I have Ms. Danielle Louw, an attorney for Ndifuna Ukwazi Law Center. Welcome, Dani.
Hi, Zach. Thanks for having me.
Dani, we are seeing tenants reporting water and electricity disconnections. We are aware that lockdown may hinder some families' ability to earn an income and pay for these services. What does the law stipulate here?
Yes, Zach. So in terms of the Unfair Practices Regulations to the Rental Housing Act, a landlord who is obliged in terms of law or the lease agreement to provide access to services such as water and electricity must do so and cannot stop or interrupt the supply of these services without a court order except under exceptional circumstances. These circumstances include, for instance, an emergency or after the landlord has given reasonable prior notice to the tenant for maintenance and repairs, etc. Furthermore, the Water Services Act also protects tenants during this time. It specifically provides that no person may be denied access to basic water services just because they are unable to pay for these services.
We all know that evictions cannot happen during this time, but switching off essentials like water and electricity can make living in such circumstances so unbearable, especially when we need to be practicing a heightened level of hygiene and have no choice but to cook our own food. Is cutting off the services some form of eviction? Well, some people may be familiar with the term constructive eviction. Can you tell us what that is and whether such treatment can be seen as a form of eviction?
Yes, so the illegal termination of a tenant's water and electricity supply makes the tenant's property uninhabitable and is called a constructive eviction. A constructive eviction refers to a situation where a landlord either does something or fails to do something which forces the tenant to leave the property. It is very important to note that in terms of the Rental Housing Act, any person who is not compliant with the Act and contravenes any regulation will be guilty of an offence and liable, on conviction, to a fine or imprisonment not exceeding 2 years or to both such fine and such imprisonment.
A number of social justice groups and public interest law organizations have written to National Command Council, Minister of Police, Provincial MECs of Human Settlements, and others to raise the concerns around electricity and water disconnections. Can you take us through that letter, Dani?
Yes, Zach. So the organizations raised their concerns regarding the increasing number of complaints about landlords disconnecting tenants' water and electricity supply. The disconnection of electricity and water deprives a tenant of essential services which are needed to combat COVID-19. They discussed how a lack of water has a negative impact on hygiene, which increases a person's risk of infection of COVID-19. Similarly, that a lack of access to electricity impacts a tenant's ability to cook food, to stay nourished and warm. This is particularly concerning as we approach the winter months and because tenants do not have other food options like takeaways or food stands during the lockdown. They noted that in most instances, the reasons provided for the deprivation of electricity or water is the failure of the tenant to pay the full rental amount. In most cases, the tenant's inability to pay rent has been as a direct result of unemployment or loss of income due to the inability to work during the national lockdown. As such, the organizations are calling on the National Command Council and the relevant provincial and municipal task teams to, firstly, suspend all water and electricity disconnections, even in cases where accounts are in arrears, until the lockdown is lifted. Secondly, to provide practical steps to have people's electricity and water reconnected should it have been disconnected. Thirdly, to direct all landlords to not disconnect residential tenants' electricity and water connection during the lockdown, even where they are in arrears, and to ensure that SAPS responds to assist tenants in cases where landlords do not follow the direction. Fourthly, to ensure that all provincial rental housing tribunals are operational and a public announcement is made on the processes through which complaints can be filed and investigated during the lockdown. Where the rental housing tribunal can't provide these services, the provincial task teams should set up an alternative service in which rental housing complaints can be filed and resolved. Lastly, that these interventions should apply to all persons living in South Africa and not only citizens.
So Dani, what options do tenants have if they cannot afford to pay for water and electricity?
So at the moment, while we are still awaiting a response from the National Command Council and others, we are heartened by Minister Sisulu's repeated instruction that no water disconnections should happen at this time. We are also aware that some municipalities have lifted water restrictions and committed to the same for electricity supplies. We encourage affected people to call their municipalities immediately to find out what relief they are eligible for at this time of crisis. Property owners can also call in to make payment arrangements should they be unable to pay for services and other property charges at this time.
Well, thanks for joining us, Dani.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me, Zach.
Well, listeners, if your rights are being violated during lockdown, there is a hotline number with public interest law organizations that may be available to assist free of charge. The number is 066 076 8845. Thanks for listening and join us on the next episode.